Hi there, and welcome back to The Real World Provider. If you listen to episode 1, then you already understand the core problem in modern healthcare. Most providers are trying to go by the book, and no one ever gave us the book. So today we're going to take that one step further. Because once you realize that book never existed, the next question becomes, how do providers actually end up under investigation in the first place? And here's the answer that surprises almost everyone. Investigations almost never start the way you think they do. Most providers assume investigations begin with major malpractice, gross negligence, or patient harm. They imagine catastrophic events, lawsuits, and obvious red flags, and that is not reality. In real life, investigations usually start quietly, subtly, and almost invisibly. And that's exactly why good providers get blindsided. So here's the myth that providers believe. Most providers believe this narrative. If I'm ethical, if I care about my patients, and if I don't cut corners, I'll be fine. That belief makes sense. It's what we're taught. Ethics, intent, professionalism, they're all emphasized heavily in training. But regulatory bodies don't investigate intent. They investigate risk, patterns, and documentation. And that disconnect is where providers get hurt. You don't get investigated because you're bad. You get investigated because something triggered scrutiny. And that trigger is often much smaller than you think. Let's talk about the most common real-world ways investigations begin. First, complaints. And most complaints are not dramatic, and they're not always detailed. They're often vague, emotional, or incomplete. A patient who felt dismissed, a staff member who left angry, a competitor who knows how to file a complaint properly, a pharmacist who notices something that doesn't align with their expectations, and even a chart reviewer who flags something during an audit. And here's the part that providers don't realize. A complaint does not need to be accurate to trigger a review. It only needs to raise a question. And once that question exists, the process starts moving forward, often without you knowing. And here's the illusion of, we've never had a problem. Because that's one of the most dangerous beliefs in healthcare. Providers say all the time, clinics rely on it, and it creates a false sense of safety. But the absence of scrutiny does not mean the absence of risk. It usually just means that no one has looked closely yet. And many providers practice for years without the same systems. Let me start over. And many providers practice for years with the same systems, the same documentation habits, and the same workflows, never realizing that those systems would not hold up under review. Then the first inquiry comes in, and suddenly everything feels urgent. And the difference between clinical thinking and regulatory thinking is critical to understand. So providers document and practice with a clinical mindset. What happened, what was done, and what helped the patient. Boards and regulators review with a regulatory mindset. What can be proven? What policies exist? What patterns emerged? And what risk does this pose? These are tuned mindsets, and they are not the same. A chart that makes perfect sense clinically may raise questions regulatorily. And a workflow that feels efficient in a clinic may look unsafe on paper. A verbal protocol that everyone knows might as well not exist. And once scrutiny begins, explanations don't carry the weight providers expect them to, because explanations aren't evidence. And most investigations are the result of accumulated small risks, not one big mistake. Things like verbal instructions instead of written protocols, staff helping out beyond clearly defined roles, documentation that assumes shared understanding, inheriting systems that you didn't design or vet, and relying on how things have always been done. None of these feel dangerous day to day, and that's the problem. Risk builds quietly until someone outside your clinic reads your records without context, without loyalty, and without assumptions. And almost every provider describes the same moment: the email, the letter, the phone call, and the immediate thought is, why are they asking about that? Because providers don't realize which details matter until someone else is looking. And that's when panic sets in. That's when providers start replaying decisions. That's when they realize that they were never taught how scrutiny actually works. And unfortunately, that's when it's hardest to fix anything. And healthcare is under more scrutiny than ever before. Boards are overloaded. Agencies rely on paper reviews. Complaints are easier to file. Competition is tighter. And documentation is often the only thing standing between a provider and discipline. And this isn't about practicing in fear. It's about practicing informed. And understanding how investigations really start allows you to identify the risk before it becomes visible, build a system instead of relying on assumptions, and document with clarity, not habit. Protect your license proactively. So the biggest shift that providers must make is internal. From I'm a good provider, so I'll be okay, to I'm a prepared provider, so I can prove it. Preparation is not paranoia. Preparation is professionalism. And it's something that no one teaches us unless we go looking for it ourselves. So what comes next? Well, in the next episode, we're going to talk about the mistakes that you don't know you're making, because those are often the most dangerous ones. Mistakes rooted in habit, in culture, in assumptions. So if this episode makes you think differently about your practice, then that's the point. Because once you understand how investigations really start, you can stop being surprised and start being protected. And that's what the real world provider is here to do. So if you wanted to go deeper into this is exactly why we unpack Clinic Under Fire, where we break down documentation, systems, staff risk, and real world regulatory exposure in detail before providers learn these lessons the hard way. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of The Real World Provider.